przy całej tej koncepcji platformy, tego ekosystemu platformowego tej firmy. To jest naprawdę imponujące. No i druga rzecz dla mnie jest kapitalna, że on był szefem, znaczy dyrektorem i dziekanem CEIPS-u. I tak naprawdę on został dyrektorem w 3 lata po powołaniu tej instytucji i akurat był w dość ważnych latach. Myśmy tam byli dużo później. Ja w CEIPS-ie byłem w 2015 i 2016 roku. No to każdy wiedział w Chinach już, co to jest CEIPS. Natomiast nawet chyba aż za dobrze, bo nawet łącznie z tym, że partia komunistyczna się wypowiedziała, że jednak to nie jest dobrze, że tam ci różni tacy imperialistyczno edukowani menadżerowie, ich tak trochę za dużo w tych Chinach, ale to właśnie Fischer był jednym z ludzi, który budował przyszłą potęgę CEIPS-u. To tak, teraz to tak wygląda, tak? Oni są w pierwszej 5 i z MBA i z Executive MBA, ale tak nie było. Oni jednak byli, hi, Professor Fischer. We are really happy to have you here.
Okay. I'm trying to, you have to unmute.
Yes.
Because we cannot hear you. Oh, great. Yeah. Hi, Professor. Good afternoon. It's great to have you here. I'm working in Industrial Development Agency, and I would like to say that it is a very big pleasure for us have you here, and please meet Professor Robert Rządza from our one of the best Polish financial university, Financial Management University, who will be your moderator, and we are your great fans. Izabela Walczewska-Schneider from IMD alumni, Katarzyna Kaczkowska, director from our Ministry of European projects, Dr. Piotr Kaczmarek-Kurczak from Leon Koźmiński University, Rafał Mrówka from other I cannot say if your school, Rafał, is better or Robert's. Let's say 2 best universities in Poland, and Paweł, director from Industrial Development Agency. So, Mr. Rządza, the floor is yours, and let's start webinar. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you very much. It's really my honor to welcome tonight William Fischer. I think that all of us, I think that we lost Professor Fischer.
Oh, okay.
Profesor Fischer się wylogował i zaloguje jeszcze raz, bo miał problemy z połączeniem.
Okej, dobra, spokojnie możemy poczekać.
Okay.
So, it's my honor to welcome you, Professor Fischer. I think that all of us who are here tonight know your work and know your, I would say, history. What is really fascinating for me is your history of China from 80s. Then as first as a chancellor, then as executive president and dean of the CEIPS, which is now one of the best.
Zaczekajmy, panie profesorze, chwilkę, bo profesor Fischer nie ma dźwięku. Sekundkę, poczekajmy, aż rozwiąże się ten problem techniczny.
Yeah, okay. I think that we can go. So I told that I think that all of us know Professor Fischer as a great thinker in the area of innovation, but also as somebody who had a hand in the fascinating times in China, transforming this huge, I would say, economy or civilization from 80s till now. And particularly for me, it's very, very fascinating, the story of China Europe International Business School in Shanghai. I was there in 2015 and 16. We have, as a Koźmiński University, some connection and some joint efforts, research efforts. But now everybody knows Shanghai. In late 90s, I think that the situation was absolutely different. And of course, the other thing which I would say is very well known in the world, maybe not so very well known in Poland, is the company, the hire. I think that a lot of Poles know what is Candy or what is GE appliances, but probably hire is less known. And I hope that you can say us tonight about your ideas connected with this global competitor. What I would like to start as some kind of the idea, it's from Kai-Fu Lee book, AI Superpowers, China, Silicon Valley, and the New World Order. And he is also a very well-known innovator in China. He was a chief of Microsoft in China and also Google. And he told something like, Chinese entrepreneurs win the most deadly competition in the world, Chinese competition. And this is why they will win the world. This is the third thing. And the second, he wrote a lot about why China is very good at artificial intelligence, because they have what they need to have to build a huge innovation ecosystem. They have a huge amount of data available at home. They have a huge computing power, and they have enough good, maybe not excellent, but good enough engineers to put it into the whole, into the system. And one thing more, they are hungry for success. They are really hungry to be the best. And I think that this is not the case of what I read about the hire, because in some kind hire, for me, it's not a typical Chinese company with this ecosystem of micro entrepreneurship, micro entrepreneurs, with this service micro entrepreneurs. Is something like not Chinese culture in China, in Chinese corporation. Maybe I'm absolutely wrong. Please, I would love to hear what you think about it. How much Chinese is higher? One of the best Chinese companies.
So how about 100%? Would you buy that? I mean, I think that first of all, let me tell you how glad I am to be here. How sorry I am for the computer problems I was having. I have no idea what happened. I just couldn't hear anything out of my speaker. Let me answer, Professor. How do I pronounce your name, Robert? Is it
It's not easy. Rządca.
Okay. It's almost okay. It's very easy. Try to say Johnson. It's similar. Okay, actually, fine. in the USSR, they call this is Johnson. It's like, you know, the American president almost. So it's easy in this way.
Okay, you said it better than I did, so I'm going to leave it at that. And let me. I hadn't really expected to start on hire, but I think it's a good place to start. You said that when you were there in 2016, China was a revelation. I'm putting words in your mouth. You could only imagine what it was like in the late 90s. My family and I actually moved to China in 1980. And when we first got there, it was like nothing we had ever experienced before. It was quite, I think if I say that the physical infrastructure, the economic infrastructure was primitive, that's probably not an exaggeration. But there was 7,000 years of history. There were pride in the social order. There was a Confucian type of structure. And so it wasn't as if they had nothing. And in a very short period of time, they've gone from a basic essentials economy to what you see today, which is extraordinary. I've learned in the process never to underestimate the ability of the Chinese people to overcome obstacles. And I think that in competition around AI, 5G, things like this, that China is a formidable and likely extremely successful competitor. And for good reason, for all the reasons that would work almost anywhere else. You mentioned the internal competition. There's pride in what they do. There's ambition, because that's the way you get ahead in a society of 1,400,000,000 people. But there's also another piece of this that often gets left out, and that is that while China has a strong Confucian emphasis, which to some degree was interpreted by Marxist-Leninism into a structure that was led to some sort of bureaucratic efficiencies. There's also a Taoist piece in Chinese history, and Taoism is about finding yourself, finding the way, not necessarily imposing from the top down, but inducing from within. And I think that what hire represents is very much, has a very strong Taoist element in it. It's not extremely Taoist, but what it is all about for 40 years now, what hire has believed as an organization is that two things matter. One is great customer experiences, and the second is that the people who work at hire have an enormous amount of tacit knowledge. They may not have all the degrees and things, but they know a lot. They know a lot about their industry. They know a lot about their customer, and that can be a very powerful asset in the pursuit of great customer experiences. And so I think one of the ways to talk about hire, which for those of you who don't know it, is the world's largest home appliance manufacturer. 70,000 people. They own the GE brand in the United States for home appliances. They own Candy and its associated brands in Europe. They own Sanyo, what used to be the Sanyo brand in Japan, Fischer in New Zealand. What hire has done is hire has consistently pursued those two goals. We're going to provide great customer experiences, and we're going to do it with our people who know a lot of things. And the result has been a really successful outcome for them. They're very experimental. They try a lot of things. Some things don't work, but they represent, I think, a new face of Chinese enterprise that is sort of, to some extent, mirrored in Alibaba Xiaomi or organizations like that, which are much more experimental in the way in which they organize and which they go to market. So I think that the question, how Chinese is hire, I think they're very Chinese, but they are also open to learning from others. So if you think about that, we're all entering an era where organizations that are curious will have an advantage over organizations that are knowledgeable, okay? That hire has a great advantage. And I think it will become a sort of one of the role models that we'll look at in the future as we think about how organizations develop. Does that answer your question? Is that a good way to start out?
Yes. Yeah, it's also for me, this is something which is it's really interesting how they managed to have this several hundred micro entrepreneurs inside this company, because this is something which is, in my opinion, not very Chinese in matter. I'd rather see the Chinese as a group of people who are governed by somebody on the top, plus a very efficient number of officers between the top and the bottom. And it's not, as far as I know, the higher experience.
Yeah, no, it's not. They consciously and deliberately removed that middle layer of middle managers. They removed 10 to 15,000 middle managers. It sounds like a mass purge. It really wasn't that. It was what they did was they redesigned their organization around these small, self-forming, autonomous work groups. And I'll talk about in a minute why they did that. But they did that. Once they did that to give themselves an advantage in a marketplace that was unknown. And once they did that, then they had no choice but to find something else for those people to do, because those people, they no longer needed the roles that middle management traditionally plays. Those two roles in particular, one is to take the vision from above and pass it below. And the second role is to make sure the people below are actually following the vision as stated. So one is a cascading vision role, and the other is a control or regulating role. And if you go to self-organizing autonomous work groups, you don't need either of those roles. So what they did was they said to middle managers, find yourself work within these newly organizing micro enterprises, the self-organizing autonomous work groups. And many of them did. Some couldn't, some could not. Some were reluctant to give up their positions. I'm in New York, forgive me. I can't mute my phone while I talk, and you're going to hear horns and sirens in the background. There's so some of what happened, the jobs just disappeared, but the individuals were able to relocate within internal labor pools. Others left. Here's what happened. Here's my interpretation of what happened. Hire for 35 years had been organizing, had been trying to reinvent themselves in different generations of experimentation, trying to give the customer this better customer experience, and at the same time redeploy their entrepreneurial energies in a way that did that. I think that worked in a reasonably linear fashion until we came to the Internet of Things. And when we came to the Internet of Things, we're beginning to see hyperconnectivity in the home, particularly in the kitchen, where your refrigerator is able to speak to your stove, is able to speak to the supermarket, is able to speak to the grocer. Yeah. And all of a sudden, the way I like to put it, this is an exaggeration, but the way I like to put it is that Hire had, for 35 years, a customer journey that could be summarized as the customer would come into a showroom, find a refrigerator that they liked or a stove or what have you, bought it. If it worked to their satisfaction, if they liked it, they would come back 15 years later and do it again. So really Hire's interaction with the customer was limited to 30 minutes every 15 years. And they could do that very, very well because it was selling their products. Then they began to develop, and they probably did this by broadcasting, develop smart appliances. And those smart appliances awakened customer expectations that hadn't existed before. So let me try to close the door. So for example, when you go to Hire now, what you see is that customers are using the refrigerator not only to store their food, chill their food, but also to respond to questions about how do I prepare this meal, or what other ingredients do I need, or would you place this order for me, or can I actually see that this is truly organic even though it's mentioned on the label, or can I take my kids to the farm? And what I think Hire recognized is that although they were well prepared for one customer conversation every 15 years, they were not prepared for 15 customer conversations every day. And the choice was, well, we can fake it. We can do it ourselves and pretend we know all this stuff, or we can go out and find experts in other expertise domains who know this stuff and bring them in and treat them as partners. And when those people came in, they had ideas that Hire had never thought about. So what began to happen was they began to see in front of their very eyes, I believe, ecosystem possibilities developing. So you could take these businesses to places that no one had ever thought about before. But in order to do that, you had to fundamentally change the way you worked. You had to be attentive. You had to be responsive. You had to be you had to share you had to share the creative activities. Maybe you have to co-brand the experience. You certainly have to share the marginal value created. And what they recognized was that their old organizations were unfit for that. There was no way, experimental as they were, there was no way that they could be as attentive, as responsive, as generous as the new model required. And so I think what they discovered was that they had to radically change. They had to radically change their organization. And what they also recognized was that they had no idea where this was going. And they had no idea where this is going because we had never been there before. So they knew everything there was to know about the solutions business when it came to refrigerators, but nothing about, the customer as a partner, nothing about the supermarket as a partner. They knew none of that. And so what I think they've done is they've said, we can't predict because there's no data. Mm-hmm. We can't forecast. Mm-hmm. So what can we do? And if we truly believe that our workers know a lot, we should allow them to display what they know. So they said to them, be entrepreneurs and start your own businesses. We'll make it easy for you to do this. And I see this as placing bets on the future rather than trying to predict. So I think Hire believes that it will be further ahead in the future than its well-known competitors, not because they predict better, because they're not predicting at all. GE has no strategy function any longer, but because they have more bets. And, one of those bets is going to work. Maybe most of them won't, but they'll be in a better position because they've taken many small chances in parallel rather than placing one big bet all at once. And I think it's working. I think what's happening actually is because they're placing these bets, they are shaping the future. So even though the future is not unknown, doesn't mean it's unshapeable. And I think that Hire's proactive approach to shaping the future is really rather extraordinary, because they are going to be the architects of much of what happens, both in the internet of the home, but also in shaping customer experiences. So that's a long answer to a short question, but that's what I think is happening.
Yeah, thanks. We have some questions from the audience, and I think that we have, in fact, three questions on three levels. So I would like to present these, and please decide with which you would like to start. The first is the question connected with, I would say, with not directly with Hire, but with the Chinese economy and the impact of Chinese traditional philosophy and beliefs, and this impact of that on the Chinese economy. And this is the first issue. I would say it is a middle issue. The second is fairly global and political, connected with the impact or connection between the authoritarian regime in China and the success of Chinese business world. Is there any connection or not? And part of this question is it possible to have the liberal democracy in China? And the third, which is maybe the most particular one, is the question about, does Hire is committed to sustainability? For example, if there is in Hire the idea of upgrade or repair and not replace.
Okay. Let me see how if I can do this in a way that's that works. So the first thing I think that's important is to recognize that in China, like anywhere else in the world, I guess, that there are some industry sectors that are seen as being important for national security. And there's almost always a heavy government involvement in what happens. And there are other sectors that are seen as being, not at all involved with national security. And they are often not particularly of interest to the government. And I think home appliances falls within that latter group. So I think by virtue of being a home appliance company, Hire is pretty much free and clear of any type of political or governmental influence on what it does or how it does it. I think as long as, I actually think that the Chinese officials take a great deal of pride in seeing a Chinese company, particularly what I'm going to call an old economy Chinese company, which is probably not true actually, but a Chinese company being recognized as an innovator in organizational innovation. So I don't think that, I think when you talk about other high-tech companies, then the level of government involvement is probably greater. I really don't actually know that, but I do know that at Hire, I don't sense any sort of interference at all, because they're a home appliance company. So I don't think that the Chinese government really cares what they do. The second question is, so that allows them to be very experimental in how they do things. I think there are norms you don't want to go beyond in any society. And I think that when Hire has reinvented its structure, and which has resulted in the exit of large numbers of people. I think they've done that with a great deal of sensitivity to why it's happening, how it's happening, and what happens to the individuals who leave. But they've also made the claim that in their industry, they need to be competitive in order to be able to survive. The sustainability issue is interesting. Let me just stop for 1 second. The Chinese philosophy. At some point, at many points now, actually, the CEO of Haier, who's a very unique individual who actually came from the local municipal government to Haier in 1984, a man named Jiang Ruimin. He has told me personally, but he's told many other people as well, that we are entering the era of management losing control. And I think that I think it's true, but I think it requires a little bit of definition. So he's not talking about an abdication of leadership, but he's talking about a repositioning of the center of gravity of where decision-making takes place. So at Haier, decision-making takes place in the micro enterprises. And there are, at the moment, 4,000 some odd micro enterprises. They make the decisions. They decide what the strategy is for their micro enterprise. So on average, a micro enterprise might be 10 or 12 people. They make the decisions about what they're going to do. They make the decisions about who's going to be hired. They make the decisions about how pay is going to be distributed. And the reason they do this is because they've invested their own money to start this micro enterprise. So Haier is at best a minority investor in the micro enterprise, and perhaps not even an investor at all, but maybe just a sort of landlord, which allows them to maintain space and office within the Haier umbrella, under the Haier umbrella. And of course, with the option that if this micro enterprise becomes successful, that Haier will have an opportunity to take an equity position in the outcome. But what happens is there's a logic here that says, well, if it's my money, I should be able to do what I want with it. And that logic is every bit as relevant in China, in post-Maoist China as it is today. So, I'm sorry, as it is anywhere else. So when Jiang Ruimin says this is the year of management losing control, what he's basically saying is these people have come up with an idea, have put together a micro enterprise and are funding it, and they're going to make the decisions. I'm not going to be able to sit in my office on the 7th floor and make the decisions any longer. So what's happening is not inconsistent with, basic economic logic within China. But there's also, remember that thread I said earlier about Taoism. There's also very much the thread in Taoism of losing yourself in the way and allowing the way to guide you forward. And I think what Jiang Ruimin is saying is we're going to allow the marketplace, the customer who's paying, to decide what goes forward and what doesn't. And we're not going to make that decision. In fact, I think he would say, we senior management, particularly since we've grown up in an analog environment, we're not really the people who should make the decisions about what goes forward or not. The best people to make those decisions are the people who are the customers. So we're going to allow them to do it, but we don't want this to be chaos. So we're going to let them make that decision micro enterprise by micro enterprise. And so at any one point in time, there's not a lot of micro enterprises that are in trouble. And you can manage then this market sorting phenomenon. And still be faithful to Chinese philosophy, Taoism. So my sense is that there's some consistencies here with what we expect of China. They just might not be the exact consistencies that we expected. Most of China we expect is a Confucian economy. Haier is not a traditional Confucian firm. It does not have it has no hierarchy. And it has none of those obligatory relationships up and down, father to son to father, you know, those are not present in hire. Now, I've been told by a young German woman who is an expert in Taoism that when she's gone to hire and interviewed people, she believes that most of them have Taoist inclinations, whatever that means. I'm not exactly certain what that means, but they are at least energized or attracted to Taoist thoughts. And I have been told within hire that they think that most people, you know, are very much in tune with the sort of philosophies that hire espouses. And my last comment on this, I'm sorry it's taking so long. My last comment on this is that they've had nearly 40 years to do this. So after 40 years, everybody who hates change is gone, right? It just became an uncomfortable place to work. And so if you have a workforce of 70,000 people who come to work each day looking forward to change, that's a very different dynamic than if you have 70,000 people who are dragging their feet thinking, I hope change doesn't happen until I retire. So you know, what's going on there is not magic, but it's also not normal. Normally, you don't have 40 years of persistent, consistent change, you know, of commitment to one philosophy. We tend to have rather constant change in the rest of the world.
Okay. We have also a question connected with the role of state. There is a book written by Mazzucato about the role of state, and with the idea that the state should start to be as some kind of a risk taker in the development in the economic development. What do you think? Is it? Could you comment on what is the Chinese development policy? In what extent, if to any extent, connected with this meaning of the entrepreneurial state? Is the Chinese state a risk taker? Is what are the functions, except because it's a little bit connected with this idea of the role of the state as some kind of the authoritarian regime, because it's possible only to see that the state is authoritarian. So, for example, in 70s in Europe, Romania was fairly popular between the Western investor because the Romanian means the peace because of the regime. So from this point of view, the Chinese government also can be said like, but please, can you comment with this idea of Chinese state as a risk taker in the economic development?
Okay, so I'm not a political scientist, so what you're getting is sort of perhaps a naive interpretation. Let me preface this by saying that when the COVID virus hit Europe, I'm Swiss American. In Switzerland, I was impressed by the canton. That's the local government. It's like the provincial government or the state government. The cantons came in, at least our canton, the Canton de Vaud, came in and offered relief, salary relief, not 100%, but generous relief to organizations that had to close because their businesses disappeared through no fault of their own, but because of the virus. So what happened was, and that's true of my school, the school IMD, but it's also true of local restaurants and shops. And what happened was that everybody received, everybody who qualified received a reasonably healthy fraction of their income so that they did not have to worry about safety, security, right? And so all they had to do was worry about the virus, but they didn't have to worry about would their job be secure or what have you, at least in the short run. I'm in New York at the moment, and the U.S. response to that was quite different. And you found a large number of people worried about how they were going to live, how they were going to get money for food, how they were going to pay their rents, how were they going to keep their job, how were they going to keep their medical insurance. So I sort of thought that the U.S. government, or at least the Republican Party, which tends to control the U.S. government at the moment, they didn't want to incur any risk at all. They were deeply suspicious of the people, of what they might do with money. They believe that if we give them money, they're going to go spend it on reckless things. And they didn't want to commit any money to those sorts of risky endeavors. In Switzerland, there was a belief in the people and a confidence the people would do the right thing. And so the risk, if you will, was reduced, not because it wasn't the same, but because there was a belief in that people would do the right thing. In China, if I can think about the responses so during the COVID virus at the beginning, I was in touch with a lot of close Chinese friends on a daily basis because I felt that it was important to support their mindset, that they weren't isolated. Little did I realize the rest of us would also be in the same situation. And they seemed to think that the government, and here I think it was a combination of state and local governments, because often it's hard to figure out who the primary actor is, was stepping in to ensure that nobody was at personal risk from losing their jobs and things like that, and that society as a whole was reducing the risk of the virus through lockdowns and some fairly strict measures. So we have same phenomenon being treated very differently in three different parts of the world. I think that the riskiest situation in the long run was the US. But does that make them a risk taker? I don't know. I think it may by default, perhaps. But because they hadn't thought about how is this going to work? And what's our obligation? What are the principles that government exists upon? I think that in Europe, those things were thought through more carefully. At least, not in Italy at the beginning, but then after. But not in the UK, maybe now. But those are things that we're all struggling with. In China, it's a single-party state. There's not really any political dissonance within the polity of the country. And so I think that the decisions were more decisive, and they were trying to balance both health of the community and the economic sustainability of the community at the same time. But let me get that out of the way. So I think China is a risk-taking society, and if you look at the 20 years between 1993 and 2000, 17 years, is that right? And I'm sorry, 27 years between 1993 and 2020. If you look at that era, 1993, because that's when Deng Xiaoping made his trip to the South, reaffirmed the policy of opening up, and both the international boundaries and also the domestic economy. I think that what's happened is that the local governments have been in competition for investment funds in order to provide employment opportunities for the people who live in these municipalities. Now we're talking at the municipal level, very local level. And so what they've done is gambled on building homes and virtually cities to attract foreign investment and domestic investment, a very risky population. If you were to go into the Yangtze River 10 years ago, the Yangtze River Basin, the Delta, you could go in a day and visit 5, 6, 7 towns, all of which were building new cities, empty cities, not without people in the buildings, but beautiful cities, or, you know, approaching beautiful cities. And the gamble was that if a foreign investor came into the region, they would choose to locate some place where they could see what they were getting and get it fast. And so in order to attract foreign investment, you had to have that city built now. That's a really risky proposition. Probably out of those 6, 4 are not going to attract any investors. So today, historically, then we talked about the China real estate bubble. The China real estate bubble was many different bets on trying to attract foreign investors. We would never have seen that in the West, whether it would have been Europe or North America. The government would never have done that. So in that way, I think China is a risk taker. If you think about the Belt and Road Initiative, risk taking. If you think about normal government support of national security interests, 5G, satellites, space programs, stuff like that, risk taking. So I'm not uncomfortable with China as a risk taker. It takes very few risks, or it tries to minimize the risks it takes domestically. And it's more expansive in risk taking internationally, I think.
Okay, thank you very much. I think that Dr. Piotr Kaczmarek-Kurcza has a question going back to hire and the recruitment policy of hire.
Yes.
Do they have a special recruitment? Please, Piotr.
Yes, a question is because, you know, the China society is risk-taking and entrepreneurial in a way of gaining wealth. But in the China companies, the mentality of management is sometimes more conservative and more hierarchical. And I wonder how the hire is finding people with this special mindset, which fulfill this philosophy of hire. If the hire is using this more extensive policy, HR policy, finding whatever is available and is fitting for their requirements, or they have a more intensive HR policy, and they find the people who are talented, but they try to shape them to feel this higher culture and requirements. What is a way of finding people good enough and fitting the role which hire is giving them? Because I think that probably it's not so easy in China society.
I think that's a good, really excellent question. So all of the hiring is done at the micro enterprise level. There's no central hiring or onboarding process anymore. There used to be, no more. So one of the rights, there are 3 rights of being in a micro enterprise. One right is you have the right to make the decisions as to what you do and how you do it. The second is you have the right to hire and fire. The third is you have the right to distribute rewards, income. So all of them, and there's no central HR function either, but there is, all of the micro enterprises, I think this is correct, all of the micro enterprises are hosted by a platform, different platforms for different industry sectors. Typically, there might be a biomedical platform and a clothing platform, things, laundry and things like this. There are 3 shared services that are available to those platforms, IT, legal, and HR. And my understanding is that the HR role is primarily around a variety of traditional HR things, but it doesn't, it's not the hiring itself. It might be a hiring process, but not hiring itself. So then the question is, how does hire attract and bring people in? I think that the power of the brand, the hire brand as an employer brand, is really, really very strong. And I think, you know, if you have 1 billion, 300, 400 million people, there's a big distribution, right? There's some people who want to be entrepreneurs, and there's other people who want to be bureaucrats, and probably the number of people who want to be entrepreneurs is small, but they're aware of the hire brand, and so I'm told that it's not difficult for hire to recruit people into their organization, and those people come in with their eyes wide open, right? So very rarely is there a misunderstanding about what would be expected of them. You know, your question and questions earlier remind me of something. Historically, in China, entrepreneurship almost always relies on networks. And historically in China, the networks have been security networks. So it's called guanxi. And you look for family or village connections, school connections, people you can trust. There's a, I don't share his political leanings, but there's a fellow by the name of Francis Fukuyama, who used to be the dean of the International School of Studies at Johns Hopkins. And he wrote a book called On Trust. And I think it's a really, really interesting book. And he argues that there are societies where trust is inherent. You wake up in the morning and you trust the system. I think the UK, I don't know Brexit, but UK before Brexit used to be like that. Switzerland's like that. You know, wake up in the morning, the system's going to work, and it's going to work for you. It's going to make life easier. And then he said there are systems where there is no inherent trust. And he uses, my wife is Sicilian, he uses Sicily as an example. When you wake up in the morning, you think the system's going to get you, you know, if you're not careful. But he also says the Confucian societies, Japan, China, Korea, are like that. And he says in those societies, you can't place your trust in the system. So you really do have to place it in friends and family and neighbors and people like that. And I think that what we're seeing, and that's always been the case in China, when you would talk to entrepreneurs or talk to people who were getting started, they would talk about these guanxi connections, but those guanxi connections are limiting. They don't open up, they close down, right? So, and the famous Silicon Valley networks open up. You know, you and I meet at a bar, and the next day we're co-investors. I think what we're seeing at hire is not necessarily at the Silicon Valley end of the thing, but what we're seeing is trust in a system that allows us to be more entrepreneurial in the expansive sense than in the contracting sense. And this is the last comment I'll make on this, but I think that one of the things you have to know about hire is that in the process of trying to meet customer expectations and appreciating what the workforce is able to bring to the company, hire has always employed big dreams. So the biggest dreams in the industry, but the most detailed examination of how we're going to do this. So I call it dreams and details. And the details, I think, are very reassuring. because the details say, and if this doesn't work, don't worry, okay? Because there's a safety net here that's going to sort of catch you. You're not going to fall into the abyss. So that combination of dreams and details, I think, is it's not unique to hire. Amazon's an example that does that. Down to the level of how big should an office be? Big enough for 2 pizzas, right? Because that's the size of a good conversation. Well, at Hire, those sorts of things are also thought out. And by thinking those things out, you provide people with a lot of freedom, and yet you give them a social support system that makes it easier for them to take chances. So if you and I wanted to start a micro enterprise, we'd have to get one other person, 3 professionals. And if we can get them the capital that's needed to get it started, either our own capital or from outside investors, then we're off and running. So it's easy to place this bet. But if we fail, and 80% I hear is the number, 80% of these new ventures fail, then we fall back into the higher labor pool. So there's the salary is low for a month and then it disappears, but the awareness of other micro enterprises of who's who in that pool is very high. So if we're hard workers and very thoughtful people, attractive talent, we made a bad decision, we're going to get a new job the next day. And so it's a very, very interesting offset to take big risks, but here's a series of details. Does that help? Does that help answer the question?
Yes, thank you very much. But still, I'm wondering, because I'm wondering about the broader questions, because sometimes it is some kind of curse to have so much people in the pool. For example, the China society, it's 1 billion and 300 300 million people. So it's a lot of people, and I have the impression that China companies are very extensive in management of HR and management. They are trying to find somebody, but not to shape somebody and raise somebody to the higher levels. So it's still the questions if the hire is using the same policy, finding the people with the entrepreneurial mindset, and how it's influenced them staying in this higher network, how it influenced them, and if it changed them, if they change their mindset, and if the hire is some kind of entrepreneurial school or entrepreneurial I don't know, incubator for these people who is staying in this company.
So I think it is an incubator. I mean, one way to think about hire is as an incubator, both of projects and as people. When a micro enterprise, if a micro enterprise is successful, it has the option of spinning off. Hire can be a minority investor. The micro enterprise team is the majority investors, but they have the possibility of spinning off. It's their choice. And I know the founders of several of these micro enterprises, and and literally one day they show up and they've got new clothes and they look different, and they've done very well. And I think that it offers people the opportunity to grow as leaders, easier than being in a company. If you and I are in a company of 70,000 colleagues, what's our chance of really being a leader? But if we're in a group of 8 or 9, then we have a very high chance of playing an influential role. And I think that it offers them that. So let me digress for a minute. About 15 years ago, seems like a long time. It is a long time. 15 years ago, a friend of mine and I but we were going into executive education situations, and we would come out at night and go out for dinner, the two of us, and we would say, these people are better than their organization allows them to be, right? Time after time after time. And what we began to believe is large, complex, modern organizations hire great people and turn them into average performers. Not deliberately, but that's the way it works. So we decided we would go out and try to find examples of where people came together and became better because of their association rather than worse. And we found 2 or 3, but no company, one company in Norway allowed us to write about them, but nobody else. So we wrote about historical examples that we could find, and many of them were in entertainment or, or science. And what we discovered was that these small groups, they were almost always small groups at the beginning. These small groups allowed everybody to participate in the conversation because everybody, it was a small place, right? The space mattered, we're all in the same room. So people got end-to-end perspectives on what was happening. Almost always there was the risk of collapse and with it financial implications. And if they succeeded, they then had a philosophy. They had the chance to reflect on what made them successful as a leader. And they became the next generation of leaders. At around the same time, a fellow named Warren Bennis, who was a very well-known professor of leadership in the United States, convened a weekend meeting on the beach somewhere in the US. And to get invited to the meeting, you had to be a CEO and you had to either be over 60 or under 30. Okay. So, and so he had 2 groups. He called them the geeks and the geezers. The geezers were people my age. The geeks were people, much younger. And, but they had several things in common, but the one thing that was most striking to me is that they had both had a fundamental learning experience in their career that gave them pause and asked them to think about what made us successful. And they then became the next generation of leaders. So I think we're seeing the same thing. And I think at Hire, what we're seeing is people who succeed. It's not easy to succeed. People who succeed are recognized. And more often than not, they've thought about what made them successful and become leadership role models for the incoming generation. And I would also say that's not just for, young professionals, but Hire hires a lot of people in service jobs who are on the margins of the economy. And those people become entrepreneurs. It's extraordinary. And they don't have a choice, right? But the ones who rise to the occasion become entrepreneurs and do extremely well financially and become recognized within Hire as successful leadership role models. So they get self-esteem and they get financial rewards at the same time. It's an interesting model, I think.
Okay, excuse me, I think that we should go to the end because, we can discuss till the morning, but I think that Professor Fischer won't have so much time for us. But I would like to ask a question on behalf of Ms. Katarzyna Kaczkowska. What is in the shoal of these micro enterprises in Hire? How does Hire keep the strategy, keep the common direction, keep the organization moving together ahead?
That's a great question. And I like the word shoal in that. I saw in the chat your question.
Thank you.
There is no common strategy. The strategy is made up by the microenterprise for the microenterprise. Now, the microenterprise is on a platform. So the platform has some mediating effects, right? The platform has influence of some sort, but the microenterprise doesn't have to accept the platform's recommendations. So strategy as we know it, which is top-down, long range, is not characteristic of Hire any longer. What I would say Hire has is a commitment to two principles, great customer experience, utilizing the talent that we have, and a willingness to allow the market to decide what works and what doesn't. And so my interpretation is that strategy becomes the ex post rationale of what we did. So let me give you an example. There's a platform called the biomedical platform, and the biomedical platform deals with a whole bunch of things that tend to be outside of the regulated part of biomedical, so they're not doing science, but they do things like blood inventory management, or they do in hospitals, or they do things like vaccine delivery in terms of creating conditions where vaccines can be delivered more effectively. So I met a young man, he was the founder of what's called the Smart Vaccine Program, microenterprise. And I said to him, how did this come about? And he said, I used to work for the vaccine cabinet microenterprise. So Hire was a refrigerator company. The small refrigerators were bought by what's called vaccine centers. In China, inoculations are given at centers where they pool all the people to be vaccinated. They come in, they make appointments, sort of chaotic, and then they hopefully get the right vaccination when they need it. He said that he had two children who were 6 years old and 8 years old. They were at an age where they were getting a lot of vaccines, inoculations, and he would take them to these centers. And he said one day he was sitting there in the center waiting with his children. And he said it was a long wait because the appointment process was really chaotic. And he said, and he looked over and he noticed that the chiller, the small cabinet, the small refrigerator door was open. It was open all the time. And so he said what that meant was everybody was receiving the vaccine, no matter what they were getting, at the wrong temperature. So that's alarming, right? And so he went back to his microenterprise and he said, we have a big problem. They're leaving the door open all the time. The microenterprise decided they didn't care, or they were indifferent, or it didn't matter. So he found two friends and they started a new microenterprise. That new microenterprise had, these sort of what's called Korean pharmacy cabinets. They have lots of little drawers. So they created a vaccine cabinet, probably the same chassis that was being used by the old one. They created a same size refrigerator, but they put 8 doors on it. So at any one point in time, only 12.5% of the vaccine was being left unchilled. And it worked. People liked it. So all of a sudden, he got enough orders. Incidentally, it was their savings that led to this. They got enough orders so that their microenterprise took off. And then they said, we remembered how terrible the waiting room was. So we got some carpenters and we said, if you're buying our new 8-door refrigerator, why not allow us to come in and redo the ambiance of the vaccine center? And you know what? That appointment process is terrible. Let us hire a higher website creator microenterprise and we'll create an app so that your appointment process is really good. And so now they sell a complete portfolio of upgrades to an existing vaccine center. So then I said to him, what about the old cabinets? And he said, that microenterprise still exists. There are still people buying that. And he says, the platform is quite content to allow the market over time to decide who wins and who doesn't. And he said, it's sort of like, you know, some people use pens and some people use pencils, or some people, you know, there's a lot of industries where there's choice. We're in both of them. We're in all of the choices. And, you know, some are going to go up and some are going to go down, but we're covered. There'll be fewer surprises for hire as an organization.
Okay, so I understand you're saying that a strategy is more of a result or a sum of the activities of the micro enterprises than an assumption at the outset, right?
Right, because first of all, there's no strategy office any longer. But second of all, nobody on the platform had ever thought about new refrigerators for vaccines. They were very happy with the old refrigerators. So this was not a strategic decision. This was the choice of three disruptors, if you will, who saw an opportunity in an industry and decided to offer a different business model. And I you know, that's the way they're running the whole organization. So they also made laundry machines, clothes washing machines. And when that became a micro enterprise platform, the smart laundry business, the first micro enterprise was to wash exotic fibers. So Hermes scarves and leather bags and, you know, very high end, premium price types of products, which get dirty, but are hard to wash. And I believe that, and it's extremely successful now, I believe nobody in any strategy group would ever say, that's a good choice, let's do that next, right? You know, so I think what's happening is there's a degree of spontaneity taking place. But here's what I think is happening on a bigger scale. What hire recognizes is in these industries where it's investing, is that we really don't know what the future brings. It's brand new. So to believe that we can extend our S-curve or predict the future is kind of crazy. So as long as if I trust you to understand your business, and you get two other colleagues, as long as your recommendation more or less makes sense and you're willing to absorb the financial risk, why would I stop you?
Okay, I think that we have the last chance for Professor Mrówka to ask the question, which is, I think, very important from the overall point of view.
Okay.
We can't hear you. I think that we still, please unmute your microphone. Yeah.
Unfortunately, we cannot hear you.
Yeah. I don't know why. It's something gone.
In my case, I unplugged my speaker and relied on the computer audio, and all of a sudden I could hear. Oh, but he can't. He's not. We can't hear him.
The question was connected with the Chinese educational system, and what is does the Chinese educational system is a barrier for the innovation ecosystems in China? What do you think about it?
So yeah, yes, and has been historically, because the primary education, primary school, is so much time is spent on memorization of Chinese characters in order to be able to be literate, that there's a docility. The the students become docile in the rest of the educational structure. So I've sat in on some of these classes at the university level, and they're discouraging. However, there's a lot of energy going into how do you make the system more interactive? How do you make the system more like the system in Europe and North America? And it's slow. And as you might imagine, the elite schools are probably more adventuresome than the other schools. And that's an area where there's strong political interest, because there's clear reluctance to entertain messages that are contrary to the party line. But I think that there are growing experiments with how they can introduce more entrepreneurial thinking into the educational process. But you're absolutely right. It's if you think about the value chain for education, education's role in the value chain, it's very much a constraining factor. Could I say one thing right here? And that is that one of the things that Hires always believed in is that linearity is constraining. So if you're in a value chain and you have an assigned role, that almost always limits your ability to contribute in other ways. And so the movement towards ecosystems is really in part a movement to break out of linearity and encourage spontaneous partnering and in the process generate more innovation. I don't expect that's going to happen in China in education, but ironically, I do see it happening in the West in education. So, there's the emergence of groups like this, of groups like Corporate Rebels and Thinkers 50 and Boundaryless, who are doing really neat stuff. And they're coming out of the non-academic sector, institutional sector of the educational sphere, and they're adding real input into how we learn and what we learn. And so we're seeing, and it's breaking down what used to be a value chain and fixed partnerships into something that's more energizing and spontaneous. So I'm very excited about that. I think that'll be harder to do in China.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Thank you very much, Professor Fischer. I think that we are out of time, absolutely. So once again, it was a really very interesting evening. I hope that, okay, I'm sorry that not all of our guests could have a chance to ask the question, but maybe next time we will have once again some time to talk and discuss this very interesting matters. Thank you, Paul.
And thank you, Paul, for inviting me. I would really love to be invited back. This was great fun. I learned a lot from your questions. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks.
Professor, thank you very much, and thank you. We know you had only 45 minutes, and I can see that you gave us too much more time, 2 times more time. Thank you very much. And Professor Rządca, thank you for great moderating.
It was a pleasure.
My colleagues, Rafał Mrówka, thank you. We couldn't hear you, but you could ask the questions. Katarzyna Kaczkowska, thank you very much for great question, and thank you for being with us. Piotr Kaczmarek-Kurczak, we know that we could make a meeting with you, and we could talk about 2 or 3 hours. There, Isabella, sorry not to ask your question, but thank you for being with us. I would like to thank also Swiss Embassy in in Poland because it was our partner in this during this webinar, and maybe Paweł will say who will be our guest next week. Thank you very much.
Thank you. But not Netflix, but 28th of October, we will meet with Omar Hatameh. He's the Chief Innovation Officer from NASA.
Wow.
So we have 2 weeks to prepare our questions, and thank you very much. Have a nice night, and everybody has hope that COVID will go away. Thank you. Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.